Welcome everyone to Gold Shields. As you can see, I'm solo this week. Dan is away, so as always, this show must continue as scheduled. So I'm going to pick it up where we both normally have it, but it's just me today, which I'll try to get through. It's going to be a little odd not having my wingman and my partner, but I think we'll make it through. Uh, Today's an interesting show with a very special guest about a topic you don't normally hear about. You certainly don't have someone coming forward as freely as Ben Freedland does. And you're going to hear this incredible story very shortly. But first, the important parts of our show and who keeps the lights on and keeps us going. Streamlight, newspapers.com, Patriot Hard Seltzer, Jason Redman, a whole host of people help us out every week. And our new partner, Wounded Warrior Project. Go on their website, check them out, support them, donate everything you can to support our wounded warriors out there. We're really excited about being partnered up with them and a proud supporter of them. So you're going to hear a lot more about them in the coming weeks and coming shows that we're really, really proud of. When we started this a couple of years ago, we didn't know about all the people that we're going to have partnered up with us, and we're really proud of it. So, and just as important, copline.org. You hear about it every week. You hear us talking about it every week. The numbers for our law enforcement brothers and sisters with suicides is way too high. It's to a rate now that's just unimaginable. So please, if you're out there, you need to talk to someone, whether it's a brief conversation or something really desperate is going on. Reach out to them, copline.org, 1-800-COPLINE, 1-800-267-5463. The other end of that phone is retired officers who have been through it, who know what you're talking about, who know what you're going through. Please reach out to them with anything you need to talk about. That's why they're there, and it's a really important part of this show. So please do everything you can to get to them and let them help you. Uh, so our show, our next episode, Ben Freedland was, by all accounts and admittedly, a violent drug trafficker around this country, doing his thing in a violent way, in a destructive way, and getting narcotics and drugs around this country at an alarming rate. But yet, through that darkness and through what he was doing, Ben reached the other side. And after an encounter that you'll hear about, decided to switch roles, turn his life around, and start working for the federal government as a professional informant, which is mind blowing, the danger that poses and what he did and how he did it to the groups that he did it with, taking his life in his own hands even more than he would every day as a drug trafficker. And you're going to hear how it was done, why it was done, and what he's doing in the future to help law enforcement officers and departments deal with sources and informants and how to do it and the right way to do it. So officers and informants are both protected. It's an amazing story that you just don't hear about a lot. You see it in the movies, you see it on TV with informants and what they do. And to get someone in front of us to tell a story, like I said, that's not shared a lot is pretty amazing. And we're really proud that we have the opportunity to have Ben on the show. And you'll hear his incredible story right after this. So don't go anywhere.
Welcome to Gold Shields. Join NYPD veterans Tom Smith and Dan Murphy. With over 50 years of combined experience chasing drug lords, dismantling cartels, and hunting terrorists. Now they pull back the curtain, sharing raw, unfiltered stories from the front lines and the heroes who stood beside them. No topics off limits. This is real. This is true crime. This is Gold Shields.
And welcome back. As promised, your host Tom Smith here because Dan is in some super secret location that we can't talk about this week. So I got the show, which is cool. Ben, a lot of people think of that world of drugs and violence as an outlet of not having the opportunities in life and growing up on the streets and not having a direction. And you were the complete opposite of that. So take us through the growing up, and what you had and where you grew up. And then I want to get to the event that kind of changed your life, the music festival. But we'll get to that. But tell us about kind of, you know, going from one extreme to another.
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very influential, excuse me, very affluent uh, household in the wealthy enclaves of Los Angeles. I had a very good upbringing. My family gave me everything I wanted and more. And I went to private school. I went to Jewish day school in Beverly Hills. I was exposed to the upper echelons of society from a very early age. I wasn't even thinking about crime or any of the problems that people might have in lower socioeconomic stratas. Um, and so I've lived a very privileged lifestyle, and I was very fortunate for that, and I transitioned into crime later in my mid 20s. Um, Essentially out of a need to make money after the recession sort of gutted our economy and threw me, a newly, minted college graduate, into a world where I just needed to survive. And my life has been about survival and entrepreneurialism, but I sort of uh, took those two things together and turned that into a criminal network where I began um, a life of crime in drug trafficking. And I sort of, it's difficult to explain everything altogether. But I went from privilege to crime to prison. And it was a very difficult transition. Uh, but I became good at what I did in crime, just as I did when I was in private school and college and in my personal life after college until I had to survive in the criminal world. It was all about adapting to my environment, and I was very good at doing that. There's no reason for me to be a criminal. And a lot of people during my time in prison were pissed off at me because they came from backgrounds where crime was essentially a stepping stone, and they were mad at me for for you know being where I was because I didn't need to be there.
Right. So did you take your drug trafficking, and we're gonna get into that obviously. Did you take it as a job? Like kind of you looked at it as this is your entrepreneurial tasking and kind of construct your drug trade as a business that you were running?
I suppose I did. I took it very seriously. I had other things that I did before. I guess we could talk about that. After college, I worked in the corporate world, and I worked for Yelp.com as a national account manager. Then I worked for my father doing multi-sensory print advertising. And then the recession hit, and I went into the world of concessions and food vending at music festivals. That was my job. And when that sort of ended in the end of the summer, when there was no more festivals, I kind of delved into the world of crime. So I went from one job to the next to the next. And the next job in that progression was crime. And I took that job seriously as that was my job. That's what I did. I applied things that I did in, the corporate world and the entrepreneurial world to the life of being a drug trafficker, which is eventually what I was. That was my job. Yes.
Yes. Sort of. It wouldn't be an apprentice show, but it was an entrepreneurial endeavor for sure. The one event that I heard, read about, and we had spoken about that kind of changed everything and got you going was a Philly music festival. Uh, and kind of getting asked to if you were able to do something. And that, I think, was the springboard, if I'm correct in where you ended up. So take us through that, the meeting of the boss and how you actually met the boss, which is a fun story with a BMW involved. Uh,
Oh, that one. Okay, yeah. I wasn't quite sure. Well, I mean, so essentially, let me start from after college. I had a successful, basically, cookie cutter life up to the point where I graduated from college. I went to San Francisco State University. I graduated in 2008, and I had some jobs that were entry level. I excelled, and the recession hit, so I went into the world of food vending at music festivals. I was selling coconut cocktails at fish concerts around the country, and then eventually I did them at music festivals. And I wouldn't. It was a big deal. I would take 2,000 coconuts to an event, sell them for $12 to $15 each, and then make 15 to $20,000 in an event. As the progression of the music festival season ended, I ended up in Philadelphia where I met an individual who needed me to start looking for marijuana in California because he knew I was from California. So I sat next to him at a music at a concert, and I had no idea where to find what he was looking for. So I just told him that I knew what I was doing, and he gave me $10,000, and I went out to California with no idea where to go. I just took a Greyhound up to Humboldt County and started asking questions, which is a great way to get robbed, by the way. Um, and I got pounds of marijuana, and I brought them across the country on a Greyhound, and I started doing that for him. Um, I progressed to taking it in a rental car and then putting it on a train. And then I stopped working for him because I found someone else that was wanting more. That's, I think, the question um, that you were looking the answer for. So um, I was working for that individual uh, that I met at a concert for, I would say, a year, and it really helped build my um, criminal resume. I started doing things more aggressively, and I was not meek. I was very crude about the way that I did things because you cannot be weak or meek in that world. Um, I had a friend who um, needed some marijuana for another friend, and it turned out that that friend was working for a person in Philadelphia. I fronted him. I think it was 2 extra pounds off of 10 pounds, and I was expecting him to pay, but he didn't. And so I waited and waited and waited for him. I intimidated the girl that introduced me to him. I eventually destroyed his. It wasn't a BMW, it was a Mercedes station wagon. I found he came looking for me, and I destroyed his Mercedes station wagon, and I hospitalized him, and I got a phone call after that progression of events from the guy who owned the Mercedes and ran the business, ran the drug trafficking organization. His name was Tyron McFadden, and he wanted to know who the fuck I was. I don't know if I can curse on here. He wanted to know who I was. He wanted to know who the white boy that destroyed his Mercedes and his enforcer uh, was. I was not a known quantity, and I just, I basically became a known quantity after they wanted to find out more about me. And so I flew out to Philadelphia. I met him at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Center City, Philadelphia, and we began a very lucrative drug trafficking business after that. I was the one person that he felt had the balls to take charge and do what needed to be done. And he really appreciated that about me. And so I became his source in California, and I started moving a lot of marijuana between California and Pennsylvania over the next couple of years. That's sort of how I started within that upper echelon of the drug trafficking strata. I mean, I wasn't in a cartel. I wasn't moving cartel weight, but I was moving 100 to 200 pounds at a time.
wow. Okay. So the one question I got for you, because of being in narcotics, of being in the gang unit, ran a lot of sources and we're in situations like that. Please tell me how is the decision to go meet McFadden? I mean, you got to think he's either gonna bash my skull in with a bat or he's gonna shoot me.
Yeah, well,
Because
that's why.
I disrupted his whole game with his number one guy. I mean, you didn't just get on a train and go, okay, yeah, fine, I'll meet you. You didn't do that.
No, that's why I met him at the Ritz-Carlton. I wanted to meet him in a public place. So I told him, like I wasn't gonna meet him at his at wherever he wanted to meet. So I specifically knew about the Ritz-Carlton because I used to stay there often, and it's a very public place and nothing's gonna happen there. So that's why I made sure that we did it there. And he met me. We sat down underneath the rotunda in the lobby and we discussed how we were going to work together. And that's exactly what happened. I think he appreciated that. That was something that he understood and respected. And that's why it went down that way. And that's why we had a very lucrative uh, business connection with one another, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what listen, the drug trade is that. It's a business. I was involved in it enough to know that as well. It was run like a business. You had certain people who were tasked at certain levels to do certain things, and that's what it was set up like. So, along with the drug trade, comes inevitably a level of violence. How did that fit into your personality, the business part of it? How much was involved with you?
Well, I'm not proud of these things, but in order to be successful in that endeavor, you have to be feared and you have to be violent. If someone preys upon you and takes advantage of you, you can't just be submissive. So I had to project an image, and that was part of my criminal resume was to be someone that was not to be fucked with, and that was someone that would be violent and pounce back if I was stepped on. And so that was definitely a part of what my whole persona was. I didn't like it. Looking back at it, I liked it then. I shouldn't say I didn't like it. I loved it back then. I loved to be feared, and I loved the seeing people fear me. But I don't like that now. I think it's weak that I was that way. But at the time, I was a force to be reckoned with, and I would not be crossed because I was very vengeful, and I would seek revenge um, methodically, and I would exact that revenge if necessary, and I did often. And it's yeah,
That's part of that world.
yeah. I'm not proud of that. I want to be very clear about that, but that was just what it was at the time. It's funny talking about it now as a father and a husband and this schmuck wearing a tie-dye t-shirt in a Ford Explorer, but that's just the reality of what I was back then, and that helped me to catapult me a little bit higher into that world of drug trafficking and crime.
And you know what? There's listeners out there that are gonna be surprised that it's a marijuana trade that you were involved in. People today, marijuana, no big deal. It is what it is. But, when you were running this, that was a enormous, lucrative, intense organizations who ran marijuana. Yeah, you had your coke, you had your heroin, you had that as well. Different type of people, different, mechanism of business, but marijuana was a big, big deal, when you were in the middle of that.
Absolutely. Back in 2009 when I started, um, it was still heavily within the black market. I mean, now you can go to, 30 different states and get, recreational marijuana across the country. But back then, Humboldt County, California was the mecca. It was the Emerald Triangle. That's where everything came from. and it was a very Wild West atmosphere where people would come to source their marijuana and move massive quantities, mostly to the East Coast. And that was a very criminally oriented world. Now it's not so much. You go up to Humboldt County, the prices have, you know, cratered, and it's not anything as it was before because it's not even really something that's associated with any of the task forces as it did. Like there's no DEA marijuana task force that's actively searching for big marijuana grows as they did before. Um, it definitely was a criminal uh, strata that was involved with marijuana back then. Not anymore, but for sure between 2009 and 2015, when I was doing that, it was definitely part of the same world as cocaine and heroin and meth. Um, but not anymore. But it was.
Yeah. I mean, you can walk in a store now and buy what you want,
Right.
so so the task forces would only the task force on a marijuana level just sit in a parking lot and watch people walk out of a store. So that's kind of out the window now.
Right.
So you're involved in this group. How long did you work for this one individual, at the level you were at?
I worked with him for 3 years. Um, and I worked with him partially without being an informant and partially as an informant. And I guess we can get into that later.
So how long did you work for McFadden?
I worked for him for 3 years between 2000, late 2012 and 2015.
Looking for powerful defense without the mess? Meet Impact, a revolutionary line of chemical irritants designed for law enforcement, military, and personal protection. With no blowback, no cross-contamination, and easy cleanup, Carry Impact delivers unmatched stopping power without the hassle. Whether you're in the field or on the street, safety should never be compromised. Protect yourself with the next generation of defense. Carry Impact, stopping power redefined.
Patriot is a premium whiskey hard seltzer. We've carefully crafted 4 flavors that not only taste exceptional, but can be enjoyed on any occasion, anytime. We're committed to giving back 5% of all profits to the core groups we call the backbone of America. We are proud to help those who serve our great country. This is America's Seltzer, the brand that stands for quality, community, and the American spirit.
Did at some point your world in the drug trade come crashing down?
Yeah. Yes. The point where it came crashing down was I was on a train. I had, I think, 40 or 50 pounds of marijuana on me. I was on my way to New York City, and I got off at Croton Harmon, 2 stops from New York, and I was essentially kidnapped and robbed at gunpoint. And I remember looking down the barrel of the gun and wondering if that was going to be the last moment of my life. It was a very scary moment, and that is when I realized that I was in the wrong world. I was in the wrong world the whole time. I just realized right there that that was my breaking point, and that I didn't want to be involved anymore in the world of crime, and I was done. I threw in the towel. It was too much for me to handle, and I immediately looked for ways to start informing. Right after that, actually.
Alright, so you get ripped, basically, which happens in the world. Was it a competitor that ripped you?
Yeah, it was. It was an individual in Pennsylvania that came out, and he was angered that I started working with someone else, and um, so I got the shit end of the stick there, and I felt very betrayed. And it wasn't necessarily McFadden's fault, but it was the world that he sort of catapulted me into that allowed me to change my mind. It allowed me to change my mind, and it's funny. And some of the guys that are listening to this are gonna chuckle perhaps, but the thing that actually got me to start informing was a sign in the post office with a 800 number on it for the United States Postal Inspector Service. And it said, if you have any information about narcotics or anything, call this number. And, I was heavily into the drug trafficking game by that time in my life. And I called that phone number, and I think I blew away the whoever picked up the phone. I started talking to them, and they were like, wait a second, we need to talk to you in person. And, that's how my life as an informant began, was looking at that sign in the Hermosa Beach uh, post office, asking for tips about crime, and it catapulted from there into, there are different levels of informants, from confidential informant to reliable informant, eventually becoming a professional informant, which is what I became after time. But where I started was with the United States Postal Inspector Service.
And what were you offering them? Like, I've been on the other end of that phone when people have just cold called us and said, "Hey, I have this, I have that." And you kind of sit back in your chair and, listen for a little bit to see if it's actually legit. And I can
Yeah,
imagine the information you were given, they were, like you said, "Okay, time out, we gotta meet."
yeah. It's
I've
funny.
been on those calls.
It's funny. I'm laughing because I remember that phone call, and you know, I haven't thought of it for a long time, but the things that I was telling them were, you know, very sensational. Like the fact that I knew that there was a postal worker delivering drugs in Philadelphia, and that there were TSA agents that were smuggling drugs through the San Diego International Airport security checkpoint. And these are things that, they're pretty substantial. And so I think whoever was jotting down with their pencil the notes was like, okay, wait a second, stop, let's meet, and you can talk to us then. And that's what happened. I think that I definitely piqued the interest of the person I was talking to, and I was on the phone with a special agent, or excuse me, a postal inspector, immediately. And I came in and I met them at their office at the Los Angeles International Airport, or at least adjacent to the Los Angeles International Airport, in the back of a post office. Um, and we discussed everything that I had, and it was like, it was amazing. It was great for me. It was cathartic. I had so much to offer, and I needed to get it off my chest, because I I was not happy with with the trajectory of my life, and I wanted to start helping. And I decided, if this is um, what I'm gonna do, then I'm gonna do it right.
Now we've all seen movies, we've seen TV shows, docudramas, the whole 9 yards about informants and what can happen. The chilling things that you go through as an informant. Did that enter your mind? I mean, you were already in a world that everything could have, dramatically ended in one day. But did now shifting to being an informant, did those possible ramifications come into your head of, if I get caught, this is going to happen. If I get caught, this is going to happen.
Of course. And by the way, it wasn't something that could happen in a day. It's something that could happen in a split second. You can, walk into a place and um, get robbed as a criminal, or you can get, your cover blown as an informant and be killed that way as well. So I realized the gravity of it, and it was something that I was already involved with. So um, I I just kept going. I knew the consequences, but I also knew that what I was doing as an informant would sort of help me to redeem myself. And the consequences were present, but I didn't really like to think about it very much. I know how dangerous it was, but it is what it is. It's just the consequence of being in that world.
Now, were you just the information you were given was all voluntary? Was it to get ahead of any possible charges that were coming down the line on you and someone finding out who you were? Or Was it the postal inspector saying, "Okay, this is just a guy who understands everything that's going on"? Like, how much asking did they do about where you've been, what you've done, what you've been involved in, all that?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, I decided to do this voluntarily. I had no idea if I was exposed in any investigation. I was, and I learned that later on. But initially, I did it because I needed to do it for myself. After I helped them initially to take down that postal worker, and I was flown out to Philadelphia to meet with the FBI who helped work that case. I was eventually informed that I was a target of a much larger investigation. And that's sort of when my world came crashing down because I didn't realize that I was involved in something that was being investigated by the FBI, but I was. And when that was brought to my attention, then at that point, I was sort of given an opportunity to continue informing on that particular individual, Tyron McFadden, or walk out in handcuffs to the detention center. Um, that's not how it was said to me, but I had exposure, is what they said. And, I could continue working or I could just get arrested in a couple of years whenever they felt like doing it. So that's when I sort of began to inform on that was my job. I was an informant. That's all I did. I continued my life as a criminal as if I was just doing what I was normally doing with that organization. But I was leading a double life and I had multiple phones and I had a handler and I would, be on a conversation with someone on a phone that was recorded and my handler would listen to the conversation and then call me back. And, I'd have to go on walks. I'd have to, really cover my tracks because it was a very dangerous world that I was living in. And I was very, very involved in that world. And it sort of evolved into a full-time job. But my full-time job was I was a criminal, but I was also an informant. It was very tiresome. It was very hard to balance that because I was lying to the people that I'd worked with, but I was also, relaying all this information in a manner that I was instructed to relay it, and in a manner that I was instructed to gather it in, because there were certain things I couldn't do, but that made it very difficult. So it was a huge game of chess. And at that point, to get back to your original question, that's when I started working towards lessening a sentence that was impending in federal prison.
Yep, we had those. We had money informants. We had time guys, who were working stuff off. We had all those. And how is I'm going this is kind of a two-part question. How is your relationship with your handler? Because looking at it on my point of view, sources I used to always say, and I still say when I get asked about it, were necessary evils. You knew what informants were involved in. You knew where they came from, but you had to trust them
Mhm.
to a point. And that's why I asked the question of how your relationship was because we were never friends. We were never buddies. It was a business thing. I'm asking you to do something, go do it. So how was that with your handlers and you?
Well, I had many handlers, but my primary handler was a United States Postal Inspector, and I still speak to him to this day. We have conversations. I don't know how much of this is true. I think it is, but I considered him to be a friend, and really, we had long conversations, not just about informant and criminal elements, but about life in general. And I stayed in contact with him while I was incarcerated. And I stay in contact with him to this day. I actually invited him to my wedding, but he said that he couldn't do it. That it would be a he wouldn't be able to explain that to his boss. But he would have come. I know that, and I talked to him about his child, and we talk about pretty much everything still to this day. So to answer your question, my relationship with my main primary federal handler was a good one. And we were, very transparent with one another. And we always were honest with one another. And I would call him up, you know, at any time, and he would answer my call, and he still does. And I really respect him mightily, and he helped shaped me as a man. He's a mentor to me, and he could have stopped talking to me a long time ago, but that's just not the way that we had a relationship. We had a relationship where we were friends essentially, and I don't know how much of that was initially a facade, but it's not anymore because he wouldn't be taking my calls anymore, and vice versa. So my relationship with my handler is a very good one, and I consider him to be a very influential person in my life. And I'm very grateful that I met him. I don't know how many people would say that about their handlers, but I think that's why I had such a fruitful and helpful um, performance in my role as an informant. And as I continued working with other agencies, he always gave me good reviews, and he was really there for me when I needed it the most. And he kept his word, and he is a very, very good man, and I'm very appreciative of everything that he's done for me and more. And I'll stay in touch with him until my dying day. I believe that. And and for the last 3 years since I've been released from federal prison, I have spoken to him, on more than a dozen occasions for longer than an hour and a half. So my relationship was a very good one. And that's not very common. I don't know if it is or not. I don't think it is. But the successful relationships like the ones that you had while you were abroad and the one that I had with my handler, that really yielded top quality information because I felt comfortable. And that's a very necessary component in the handler informant, world.
And that's exactly what my next point was gonna be. The number one rule was don't lie. Don't lie. If I can't do something for you, I'm not gonna tell you I can, and vice versa. And if you can't get into somewhere, you have to tell me that. And, the biggest thing was credibility. If you don't have any credibility as a handler with handling any source, you're not gonna be good. You're not gonna get another one, first of all, and you're not gonna do well. So my approach was always to be honest with what we were doing. "Hey, Tom, why are we doing this? Here's why we're doing this." And you tell them, because it just made it easier. It made it better. And you knew that I wasn't going to BS you. It was what it was. Whatever the situation was, is what it was going to be. And that's what worked.
Yeah, there's a term, it's widely used, you can't hustle a hustler. And you can't when you're dealing with a criminal, you are, if they can detect bullshit very easily. And if you're working on the level that at the upper echelons of the criminal strata, you risk losing that individual and losing your case and starting all over again. And so it's very important to have that. You have to be transparent. You can't lie. It just needs to go in that direction. And some of what you're talking about is life or death. And so that is what sort of molds the handler and informant, at least the successful relationship between the handler and informant together to be successful, is that you're going through these really dramatic things together, these life or death things, and you have to be honest, you have to be transparent, and you cannot lie. That's a very good point.
You can't. It never worked. And that was rule number one. Uh, Next, I want to ask you the cases that you worked as an informant. Were the subjects known to you already? Or did you go in absolutely stone cold with intros and trying to get in somewhere? Or were these organizations and people that already knew who you were?
So when I began, these were individuals that I knew, that I had been personally working with. But as I progressed past the United States Postal Inspector Service, working with him along with the FBI and the United States Attorney's Office, I started working in a professional capacity with other agencies across the country. And that is primarily when I started the entryway into meeting people that I didn't know in order to build a case to take them down. So I've done both to answer your question. And, you know, both both of those are totally different because if you start off and you have information about someone that you know and you're personally talking to them, that's great. But if you have to go out and uncover something and use a tactic or a strategy that gets you to get that information, it's a lot more complicated, but it can be done. So
So you start working with different agencies, ATF, FBI, all that. What's the most, gotta ask this, this is what everyone's probably gonna wonder while we're talking. What's that case, that one dangerous case that you went, all right, this is A, gonna be hard, B, this might not end well.
well, when I was in San Francisco working with the ATF, I was essentially tasked to find heroin and guns, and I had absolutely no idea how to do that. Um, and it got hairy and dangerous because I started from the bottom. I basically wandered around the Tenderloin, which is a very, very dangerous, drug filled neighborhood in San Francisco. I don't know. Have you ever been there?
I've heard of it. I know
It's
people that
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a notorious neighborhood. I just had no idea how to gather information, so I just sort of walked around in disheveled, clothing. I looked disheveled. I was walking around. I was looking for things. I couldn't go up to people and say, "Hey, do you have drugs?" There were small amounts of drugs that could be purchased, but that wasn't going to lead to any information. So I essentially befriended a prostitute. Um, and I asked her for her time to talk to her, not perform any sexual acts because I was too nervous. That was just my cover. And I was talking about how I, had just been released from prison. I related to her, and she helped introduce me to the world of heroin and guns in San Francisco. And that really, it took a kind of a crazy turn. At one point, I was opening up a door with a shotgun pointed at me. Luckily, it wasn't a real shotgun, it was a prop gun. But nonetheless, it was very scary. And it sort of was a wake up call to what I was doing. Um, that one particular instance was very scary. You sort of stop in your tracks, and your heart sinks into your stomach, and you're scared, but you can't show that you're scared, so you just have to keep going. When he opened up the door with the shotgun and then he put it down and said, "I got you. This is a prop gun." I was just, completely terrified, but I had to maintain my persona. That was one of the incidents that was really scary, but you had to maintain your composure and continue putting on that face. I suppose that was one of the scariest elements for me, was just walking around and being sort of like a low level criminal on the streets of San Francisco. And at one point, you know, um, one of the leads that I was able to pass along to the ATF found out that the person that I had introduced her to was an undercover ATF agent. And I was only informed of that in person at the workplace of an individual who had introduced me to that individual and called me a snitch. That blew my cover, and I was out of San Francisco. That was a scary moment for me, for sure. And I wouldn't want to be in that position again, especially if I was in the Tenderloin. Luckily, I was approached about being a snitch, um, in a public area, and I stopped working in San Francisco altogether, but not after I had helped with at least a dozen cases in that jurisdiction. So I that was a scary moment. There was a lot of moments, and my work continued while I was incarcerated, and there was a lot of scary moments there as well. But I just had to maintain my composure and just keep going. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I just there was a lot of moments. There wasn't just one, and that was just one that came to mind.
Well, being that there wasn't just one makes it more crazy. Thank you. That you
Absolutely.
When you get asked a question of what's the most dangerous thing you've been through and you can't pick one, that's wild. That
I
just
mean,
says a lot.
I was selected to enter as a cellmate um, in a prison environment where I gathered information and passed it along to the FBI. And the individual I was gathering information with, I was locked in a cell with him. He was a leader of a pretty substantial and well-known criminal enterprise, and that was scary. The only thing that made it less scary was the fact that he was on drugs the whole time, and he was sort of like not together. But he was a very feared man, and I was stuck in a cell with him between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. for a month. That was a very intimidating time, but it was my cover was never blown. And so, but if it was, and I was locked, in a cell with him, and someone somehow passed along information that I was informing on him, it would have been very dangerous and lethal. So, yes, there were many situations that were very, very sketchy, and I can't put my finger on anyone that was the most sketchy. There was a lot of sketchy situations. So,
Okay, that says it all, brother. That's that says it all. But the prison one is interesting because I just want you to get into a little bit of actually, when you end up going to prison. I want you to hit on that after my question. And then when you're in a cell getting that, and I've been involved in those, you have to be patient. You have to be don't cross that line. Don't ask too much. Don't go there and let it kind of work its way into a conversation. Did your handlers at the time understand that it's just going to take a while? This guy is not going to give up what you're looking for tomorrow. This is going to take a while, and you have to really know what to ask and what not to ask when you're looking for info.
yeah, I think they understood that. But at the same time, I think they were also surprised at how fast I got it out of him. He wasn't very cognizant a lot of the time. He was snorting psychiatric medication and it would make him hallucinate. But after he was done hallucinating, he would just recite the details of this gruesome double homicide, which he committed and was the trigger man for. And he did it over and over and told me the same story every single night. Um, and I was getting information out of him almost immediately. And as I passed along that information, the FBI and my handler sort of helped guide me into what questions they really needed to have answered. And I got them out of him. And it was a difficult task. That was not easy, but that was the hardest thing I ever did because I was stuck in a cell with this guy for over a month, and he was a raging drug addict, and he was also a killer. And I chuckle at that, but that's definitely a nervous chuckle. So, uh, you know, you're listening to this, and this is your job, and you know, I'm hearing what he's saying, but I'm also having nightmares about the way that he described the homicides, and the fact that I'm stuck in a cell with this guy for a period of time where it's going to be nearly impossible for me to get help if he decides to exact revenge for finding out that I'm informing on him. But luckily, he never found out. So,
Have you ever wished you could go back in time and see the events that shape the true crime cases that fascinate you? With newspapers.com, it's like having a time machine to the past. Dive into more than 1 billion newspaper pages from 1690 to 2025 and relive the headlines that shocked entire towns. Explore newspapers from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond with a simple search. Read the breaking news as it happened, crime scene reports, witness testimonies, and courtroom drama. Explore forgotten clues and see how the media shaped the narrative of infamous cases. But it's not just the major stories. Newspapers.com lets you dig into local mysteries, missing persons reports, and the small-town scandals that history forgot. It's the closest you can get to being there when it all unfolded. So, If you're ready to dig deeper into the crimes that keep you up at night, start your journey today at newspapers.com. Use the code GOLDSHIELDS for an exclusive 20% discount on your subscription.
When it comes to the safety of law enforcement, first responders, and military personnel, every moment counts, especially in the dark. Streamlight provides the reliable, high-performance lighting solutions that these heroes trust in the most dangerous situations, whether it's a car stop, navigating dark alleyways, or exploring abandoned buildings. With Streamlight by their side, our heroes can tackle challenges with confidence, knowing they have the power of advanced lighting technology to guide them. From the first responders on the front lines to the law enforcement officers ensuring our safety, Streamlight is there to make every mission a little easier and much safer. Join us in supporting those who protect us. Visit Streamlight.com to discover how you can be part of the team keeping our heroes safe. Because when they shine, we all shine.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
Well, you're here. Well, that's so it worked.
yeah, it worked. And, that information was the end sort of my time as an informant. I had worked as an informant for 3 years. I worked starting with the Redondo Beach Police Department, and the United States Postal Inspector Service, the San Mateo Sheriff's Department and their Narcotics Task Force, the ATF. I worked for a time with the DEA. I've worked with the San Francisco Police Department, and then I worked with the Special Investigative Agent in the Bureau of Prisons to help solicit information and pass it along to the FBI about this individual. So, that was the end of my career, and it ended as me becoming a protected government witness in a federal protective custody unit. And, I've spoken to you about this before, and, there are other names for that world of protected government witnesses in protective custody units, and you can Google it and see what it means. But that's sort of the end of the rope. That's the top of the food chain as an informant, is to be participatory in that. Um, I have to be careful about how I say that, but to be in that protective custody unit as a protected government witness is the pinnacle of being an informant. So I've essentially been a confidential informant all the way at the bottom to becoming a reliable informant, a professional one, and then graduating to the top and being with the top informants and government cooperators that this nation has ever used and had. So I've covered all of the bases.
Yeah, you certainly did. How much federal time did you actually do?
I did 77 months. I spent 30 months in a protective custody unit as a protected government witness. I left that unit and I went to general population. I spent 2.5 years in solitary confinement. So that was obviously a very difficult time, but helped me to become physically, mentally, and spiritually stronger as a man, and helped, turn my life around. Prison was definitely very difficult and traumatic, but I got out of prison and I was very successful in starting a business, becoming a father, and getting married, buying a home, paying it off. And so prison made me strong. Solitary made me stronger. And it was a very difficult mission for me to to go through. I'm glad that I did it and made me stronger, but I wouldn't want to do it again. So,
No,
but
that's a once in a life. That's a once in a lifetime gig, bro.
yeah, I don't want to do that again. That was horrible. But I during the time before I went into prison, I was working as an informant, and it got me to the upper echelons of the informant world. And when I got out, I decided, this is something that I want to share and help law enforcement to sort of connect the dots between having an effective informant handler relationship and an ineffective one. So now my goal is to, help law enforcement even more. I don't need to, I have no desire to do the type of work that I was doing before in the field and going out there and buying guns and heroin and drugs. I'm not doing that anymore. What I want to do now is I want to help handlers across the country to better understand how to target, maintain, groom, and fix their relationships with their informants so that they can get the big cases that they need for the purposes of the job that they're doing, which is law enforcement and getting the bad guys locked up. And, that's a very important thing. And it's a unique thing that I can do because I understand the world of book smarts and street smarts. It's a very, very hard world to mesh together. And I can help the law enforcement world to understand how to bridge the gap between, like I said, an effective relationship between handler and informant and an ineffective one. That's my goal now because I was able to cross all of the lines and figure out how to be effective now that I'm not required to be involved in anything to work off a sentence or, a felony charge. I'm more interested in helping the law enforcement world to do exactly as what I said, to have an effective relationship as a handler with their informant and to bring the bigger cases in by helping understand the criminal mindset a little bit better.
You know what? It's amazing. I read your manual, the rough copy you provided me, and it is so eye opening, and it's going to be such a great tool for law enforcement agencies once you get it out there. And even more, and I predict this happening, you're going to get asked to do speaking engagements, yeah, because there's nothing like you can read anything you want. When someone's standing in front of you and listening to you and hearing the stories of how things are done and why they're done and the right ways to do it, it's a greater impact. And I see that in your future for sure, because, we spoke about it before we started the show, Ben. This conversation isn't the norm. It's not out there about development of sources, handling them, relationships, what to, what not to. And having someone that has done it at the level you have is invaluable to training law enforcement officers in this country. And, I think it's going to be great. The outline you gave me is great. And, I said to you before we started, I had a lot of sources that I ran, and I read what you said. I go, damn, I probably did a bunch of things wrong. But it's a great opportunity for police departments to learn more about this, and I think you're on your way.
There's a huge learning curve in this line. And yes, you're right. No one in my capacity is going to come out and talk about what I've done. First of all, it's inherently dangerous, but I'm very careful not to place myself in a predicament where I'll be in danger. As a father and as a husband, I'm just not, I'm obligated to protect my family. So what I do when I do talk about certain people, for example, Tyron McFadden, I talk about Tyron McFadden because I still talk to Tyron McFadden. I'm a very extroverted guy and I'm very likable. And I'm not trying to, toot my own horn, but there's not a lot of people that still talk to the people that they have formed on in prison. And I talk about Tyron McFadden, like I said, because I still talk to him to this day. He's incarcerated, but he and I understand why we did what we did. I found out later on that he also was an informant, and so I think that's part of the reason why I can still talk to him. But getting back to this unique element, I think what was that movie, Catch Me If You Can? Frank Abagnale Jr. He write the book? He wrote a book, or he helped the FBI. I think he helped them to his dying day. I'm not Frank Abagnale Jr., but I'm in the same position where I've crossed the line as a criminal and I'm working with law enforcement, on my own fruition. Um, this is something that is unique and it can help law enforcement. But what is it that I'm doing to help law enforcement? And that's the kind of the crux. That's the meat and potatoes of what I'd like to explain. And so basically, a lot of people that work in law enforcement don't understand. They might read about it in a book, like you said, and they may have majored in criminal justice in college, and they might have worked for a time on a beat in the ghetto or whatever, but they don't really truly understand how the criminal mentality works because they've never had to be a criminal. They've only worked around them and arrested them and talked to them. But those people, you typically talk to them because they're talking to them for a reason, because they're using them to sort of find out more information about how much trouble they're in or how much they can work to get off. Now it's the time for someone like me to really get out there and talk to different law enforcement agencies about how to really get in there and help the detectives and the agents and the inspectors understand how to, fill in the gaps when they don't know where their case is going and how they can manage their informant more effectively. So what I'm trying to do is, there's only so much that you can read about in a manual. I made that manual very, very brief because a lot of the guys that are working big cases, they have a lot on their plate and they don't have time to read a 60-page manual. If you want to read my manual, it's going to take you 15 to 20 minutes. It will be really helpful and you can get some insight into how a professional informant works. And given that you understand that, you can sort of get into the world that I was in. But what will be most helpful will be for me to get out there and do those speaking engagements and then eventually take on phone calls from people that are stuck in the field. If an investigator, an agent, or a detective is, at a crossroads and can't get any further and his informant isn't talking to him anymore or he doesn't know who to target, it might be a good time to call me because I'll probably have an idea of how to help you to uncover how to effectively get him to spill the beans a little bit more, share information, and there's an art to it, and not everybody has it. But if you have it and you're able to share it, then great, because that will eventually help to, win at the end of the day. And these investigations, as you know, are not things that are just a one phone call type of thing. A lot of these investigations, especially federal investigations, these are year-long investigations, years long. And so this is not just like a police officer on the beat in a bad neighborhood that's calling me. I'm talking about, someone that needs to have a little bit more insight on how to interact with his informant because he just doesn't know what the hell he's doing, or he did, but he's lost it and he doesn't know what to do anymore. So that's where I really come in because there's not very many informants that are able to, share that information from my perspective. And that's what's going to be most important about how I progress and speak and consult.
No, I think it's groundbreaking. I think what you're going to do is going to be so helpful because there is nothing more frustrating, more upsetting is when you hit a brick wall in a case. And it happens in every case. At some point, you run into a void of, all right, now what? Or what are we doing? Or why did that go wrong? Or anything like that. And it does happen. And to have, someone like you possibly and hopefully at the fingertips of some agencies will be so beneficial. Because like you said, cases go on for years and are detailed and integral and crossing each other and all of that. And I think what you're doing is on its way, Ben. I really do. And we're gonna stay in touch. You're gonna keep in touch with me so I can pass on the information about where you're going and where you're at and push this because I think it's important. And it's coming from a guy who was involved in everything you just talked about on the show. Cases and long term and sources and bad guys and drug dealers and all that. So I love the outreach that you're going to be having with law enforcement agencies to talk about this. I think it's great.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to working with everyone that's listening, but everyone that, needs help. If you're listening to this podcast and you're stuck or someone that's stuck, uh you know my I'm available to speak to you, and um don't be ashamed of it. It's not something that it's don't take it personally. It's difficult to understand the criminal element, and I understand it. very, very well. I lived it, and so I understand it personally. And if you need help, call me. I'm going to help you. And it's an important element to have. There are professional informants, Tom. You know that, but they're working in the field. I have sort of a different role because I'm gonna sort of help to explain some of the things that aren't explained in the textbooks or the classes or the academies. And that's where I come in. So
Fantastic. So by the time this comes out, it was released, we'll have some contact info, some ways to get in touch with you and all that. We're gonna be well armed to get your information out there, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it and hearing your continued efforts to help and protect those who need protecting because it is dangerous. It's real dangerous, and the more information that protects everyone, the better. So
absolutely.
hats off to you. Hats off to you for doing this.
Well, thank you, Tom. I really enjoyed this interview, and I look forward to whatever this brings. And I appreciate your time. And to everyone that's listening, like I said, do not hesitate to reach out to me. We'll have contact information. I'm sure that will be attached to this, and I'm open to talking to departments, doing seminars, and speaking engagements, so that you can better understand how to bridge the gap between ineffective and effective handler informant relations. But thanks again, Tom. I really appreciate your time.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining. Don't go anywhere because we got a couple of things to talk about. But what a great show, because we were looking forward to this. This has been, looking forward to for a while, because it's so interesting and so everything I was involved in, with police work. No matter what detail you went to, you had informants, you had sources. So the more education you can get with how to do it, the better. And Ben, I'm proud of you for where you came from, what you're doing now, and what you're going to continue to do. So thank you for what you do. Uh, and listen, this is our part of the show that we send a shout out and a prayer out to our law enforcement officers across the country. They do a tough job, and all they want is a thank you. So if you see them in the store, say thank you, give them a wave on the street, because that means the world to them, and keep them and their families in your prayers, because their families go through exactly what they're going through as well, with not being home and missing birthdays and missing holidays and all that. So it's a group effort. So please keep them all in your prayers, as well as our military vets and our victims of crimes out there and their families. Please keep them all in your thoughts and prayers. And as always, the goldshieldshow.com is our website, youtube.com/@goldshields. And so hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, hit all that good stuff, and keep following us on every audio channel you can think of. We're all out there. So we love the support. We're glad you're all here for this ride. And Ben, thank you so much for joining us again. This is Tom Smith for Gold Shields. Everyone, please stay safe out there. We'll see everybody soon.